Today, I'm going to show you how I color grade DJI Osmo Action 4 D-Log-M footage, but first, let me share with you my most used settings. I usually shoot in 4K 25 or 50p. This provides me with the highest possible resolution and image quality. I set the stabilization to Rocksteady Plus. I believe it delivers the best stabilization results on the Action 4. I set the field of view to standard, unless I'm shooting action sports, in which case I'll use ultra wide. I always change the white balance manually based on the scene. I set the color to D-Log-M for the most dynamic range and versatility in post-production, and I set the sharpness and noise reduction to -2 because I want complete control when manipulating my clips in post. When it comes to exposure, I manually expose all of my shots 90% of the time. To reduce noise in the footage, I try to keep the ISO at 100 as much as possible and then adjust the shutter speed till the camera's exposure value is roughly at +0.0. I have created a guide on how to expose Action 3 footage, and the same approach works for the Action 4. You can watch it here. However, if I'm doing action sports, for example, or if I don't have time to manually change the exposure, I use the following semi-automatic settings: ISO 100 to 400, shutter speed 1/200 to 1/8000, and EV compensation +0.0. The Action 4's auto exposure and auto white balance actually works quite well, but you should still manually expose your shots as much as possible for the best results. Let's start color grading. Alright, so I have here two clips on the timeline. Let's start color grading the first one. I'm gonna start with basic color correction. Let's add color board and color curves. And I'm gonna start with color board. I'm gonna drag the midtones down to increase the contrast to about -43. I'm also going to drag down the shadows to about here, -10, and slightly increase the highlights to increase the contrast in the shot. I'm also going to increase the saturation. I'm gonna go overboard and then push it down until I'm satisfied, which is roughly around here. Next, I'm going to correct the white balance with color curves, and I can immediately see that this shot is a bit too green, especially in the midtones. So I'm going to add a point in the midtones of the green curve, and I'm going to slightly push it down by holding the Option key on my computer. And I think this fixed the green tint. This is the before. This is the after, and also I think I'm going to remove the reds in the shadows. So I'm going to add a point in the midtones of the red curve and also another point in the shadows here, and I'm going to slightly drag it down, just like so. Now, for those of you who aren't that experienced with color grading but still want to experiment with D-Log-M on the Action 4, I'm going to provide you a free LUT that basically going to add contrast and saturation, and you can find this LUT in the description box down below. But before I go ahead and download this LUT, I would appreciate if you can click like on this video and also subscribe to the channel. Let's continue. Alright, next thing I'm going to do is add some sharpness to this shot because I reduced it in camera. I'm gonna use the sharpen tool. And I'm gonna do about 1.5 with the sharpness. After that, I'm gonna add hue versus saturation curves, and I'm going to play around with the dominating colors in this shot. Let's start with the greens. I'm gonna select the yellows, greens, and slightly change the hue. I think I'm gonna go for like a very green grass. I'm probably also going to increase the saturation of the grass. Next thing I'm going to do is change the color of the sheep. So I'm gonna select the hue of the sheep and I'm gonna lock it here, and I'm gonna change the color. And also I think I'm going to increase the saturation slightly. Next thing I'm going to do is change the color of the mountains here. I think these colors are the teals and blues. So I'm gonna push it towards teal in here and slightly increase the saturation. I'm also going to desaturate the magenta colors and also the purple colors because there's nothing magenta and purple in here. Next thing I'm going to do is add some masks. I'm going to start with reducing the highlights in the sky, and then I'm going to isolate the sheep from the background. So let's add color board. Let's also zoom out a bit. And I'm going to add a shape mask, make it bigger, just enough to select the highlights in the sky. And then I'm going to add another mask, a color mask. I'm going to select the highlights in the sky. I'm going to click View Masks, and I'm going to adjust everything in here until only the sky is selected. Alright, I think I'm happy with the selection here. I'm gonna disable the view masks and I'm going to slightly drag down the highlights. Not too much like this because it's going to introduce artifacts. Okay, next thing I'm going to mask out the ship in here and isolate it from the background using the same method as I did with the sky, more or less. So I'm going to add a color board and I'm going to go to the first frame because I think I'm going to enable tracking for this. I'm going to add a shape mask. And I'm going to enable tracking. I'm going to click Analyze. And then I'm going to also add another color mask and select the ship color. Click View Masks and basically adjust everything until only the ship is selected, as much as possible at least. Okay, I'm more or less happy with this selection. I'm going to disable view masks and I'm going to increase the highlights on the inside just to make the ship brighter. And on the outside, I'm going to decrease the midtones to create contrast and basically make the background a bit darker than the ship. And I'm happy with this. This is the before and this is the after. It makes the ship pop from the background. And honestly, this shot is already usable. It looks nice already, but I'm going to make it look a bit more stylish with color wheels. And I think I'm gonna go for like a magenta vintage look. I'm gonna push the shadows towards blue, purple like, the midtones towards yellow, and the highlights towards yellow green as well. And I'm going to use this mix slider to adjust the intensity. I think somewhere around here looks nice. And I'm also going to reduce the midtones a bit and play around with the wheels to finalize the look. Alright, let's start from the beginning. First, I adjusted the exposure and saturation with color board. Then I adjusted the white balance with color curves. Then I increased the sharpness with sharpen. Then I played around with the colors with hue saturation curves. Then I masked out the sky and reduced the highlights. Then I masked out this ship to make it pop from the background. And finally, I added a filter to give this shot a stylish look. Moving on to the next shot, I'm basically going to do the same thing. So let's start with adjusting the contrast, saturation, and white balance. Open the waveform and reduce the midtones. Slightly reduce the shadows. And I think I'm going to leave the highlights as is. Then I'm going to adjust the saturation. Next thing I'm going to do is adjust the white balance with color curves. I can definitely see that this image leans more towards red, so I'm going to fix it with the red curve. I'm going to add a point in the midtones, push it down slightly and go back up until I'm happy, which is somewhere around here. Let's play around also with the shadows here and also with the greens, and I think I'm happy with this. Next, I'm going to add sharpness. I'm going to dial it back to 1.5, and then I'm going to add hue versus saturation curves. So first, I want to reduce the saturation of the reds in this sign. Then also, I think I'm going to play around with the warm orange colors. And also, I don't like the teal blue colors in here, so I'm going to select these colors and I'm going to change their hue somewhere around here and also slightly reduce the saturation. And also I don't like this magenta tint in here. I don't know if you can see it, but I definitely can. So I'm going to select the magenta colors in here and desaturate them. And next thing I'm going to do is reduce the saturation in the shadows. I'm gonna add a point in here and probably put it somewhere around here with a nice little curve to make it more gradual. Now let's do some masking. I'm going to zoom out, and first thing I want to do is reduce the highlights on this side. So I'm going to add color board, I'm going to add a shape mask, and I think on the inside I'm going to reduce the highlights by about 10%. Another thing I can do is create a vignette around this woman because she's basically the main subject in the shot. So let's try that. I'm going to add color board. I'm going to enable the tracker and I'm going to analyze. And now I'm going to increase the highlights on the inside by about 6%. And on the outside, I'm going to decrease the midtones just like so. It's barely noticeable. This is the before and after, but it definitely makes this woman pop a bit more from the background. Finally, let's add a stylish look to this shot with color wheels. I think I'm gonna go for like a moody blue cold look. So I'm gonna push the shadows towards teal blue. And with the midtones, I'm gonna go for warmer colors, somewhere around here. And with the highlights, I'm gonna go for like yellows. And I'm going to adjust the intensity with the mix slider. And I'm gonna put it somewhere around here. And also let's try decrease the midtones a bit, just to add a bit more contrast. And I think I'm happy with this. All right, so first thing I've done here is I added contrast and saturation with color board. Then I adjusted the white balance with color curves. Then I added sharpness. Then I played around with the colors with hue saturation curves. Then I masked out the highlights in here, reduced the highlights on this side of the frame. Then I masked out this woman and created a vignette around her. And finally, I added a stylish look with color wheels. Alright, so I think I'm done for today. And as I always say, try to get most of the results in camera. So you'll have to do the least possible in post. You want to get a good shot in camera and make it even better in post-production with color grading. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it informative. Go ahead and download my LUT down below. And I guess I'll see you in the next one. Peace.